What is your impression of the Native Americans? Was their life all about hunting and gathering, living a primitive lifestyle as we've learned in books? Recently, an American archaeologist named E.D. Barnhart has become very popular. Netizens are very excited about his online courses. Barnhart specializes in American archaeology. He raised a question like this: before the European explorer Columbus discovered the Americas, what kind of life do you think the people there were living? Were they staying in thatched huts or silver tents? If they weren't gathering fruits or hunting, then maybe they were on their way to do so. If that's the case, then perhaps what we learned in school has led us to completely wrong perceptions. We have all been blinded by history books. Contemporary archaeological research has found that the people of the Americas, or at least many of them, were living prosperous, abundant lives. In fact, they may have been more advanced than other parts of the world. Today's story will definitely go beyond any impression you've ever had of Native American civilizations. Today, let's talk about the hidden truth of American civilization. Hello, everyone. In 1950, a Mexican man named Alberto Ruiz Lulia led a small team through the wilderness for an entire day and night to reach a place called Palenque, located on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. Covered in shrubs and dense jungle, it was such a remote and wild land that even the native Maya rarely visited it. So why did Mr. Lulia come to such a godforsaken place? Because for a long time, a legend had been passed down on the Yucatan Peninsula saying that beneath Palenque, there was gold. In the 18th century, the Spanish arrived in Yucatan and heard of this legend. When the eager Spaniards rushed there again, all they found was thick forest. Driven by the thrill of treasure hunting, they cleared a patch of land, but uncovered only the remnants of large architectural ruins buried under soil. It was a desolate heap, nothing but stone and old dirt. Disappointed, the Spaniards named it Palenque, meaning fortress. Later on, archaeologists and historians visited these fortress ruins and came to a common conclusion. This was an indigenous Maya settlement from around 2,000 years ago. The scale was very small, only a few thousand people, not even worth mentioning. Therefore, a firm conclusion was made that Palenque was a low-quality archaeological site, not worth exploring or clinging to. In 1950, he was also an archaeologist, but he did not believe those unconvincing conclusions. Lulia personally believed that the legend was not baseless, that Palenque surely held secrets buried beneath that no one yet knew about. He hoped to find real gold, which was also the buried civilization itself. Fortunately, Lulia received a large archaeological grant from the Rockefeller Foundation. And so, with money and a full team, Lulia decided to go to Palenque to fulfill his dream. The archaeological team dug tirelessly every day, clearing the remains of the architecture. Among these, after 3 months of hard work, Lulia was astonished to discover that the massive mound of dirt was actually a temple. This temple was built atop a towering pyramid. The construction style of the pyramid matched the consistent architectural style of the Maya, featuring a stepped shape with the bottom step measuring 65 meters long. The temple was built atop a 9-tiered pyramid overlooking the interior. The temple itself was lavishly decorated, with murals covering all 4 walls, though most had peeled off over time. On the back wall were 2 massive gray stone slabs, carved neatly with hundreds of Maya hieroglyphs. Lulia was mesmerized by the carvings on the wall, even though he couldn't understand a single character. However, he knew that his instincts were correct. Civilization was synonymous with wealth. Palenque was indeed a place gilded with gold. But whose civilization it was, at that time, no one yet knew. Right when Lulia was mesmerized, admiring the hieroglyphs at his feet, he suddenly tripped and almost fell. Upon closer look, he realized there was a massive stone tile under the temple floor, not very even. As he turned to leave, he suddenly noticed something strange about it. This massive slab was carved from a single block of stone, about 1 square meter in size, with 2 holes on either side. Could this tile really be lifted? Lulia quickly asked his assistant to bring 2 iron rods and insert them into the holes. The 2 of them joined forces. 1, 2, 3. And sure enough, they managed to lift the stone. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. There was something beneath it. Luilia's eyes widened. He saw that beneath the slab was a staircase leading into the interior of the pyramid. Lulia and his team were overjoyed. A secret door. That must mean there was a secret hidden within. They knew that at the end of this staircase, there were likely even more shocking secrets waiting to be uncovered. However, the stairway passage was stuffed with stones and rubble. It looked like someone had intentionally blocked the path. Luilia's team carefully cleared it bit by bit, and it took them 3 full years to completely clean the staircase and the passage it led to. At the end of the narrow path, they found a simple stone coffin. Upon opening it, they saw that it was packed with 6 corpses. Naturally, Lulia did not believe the Maya would go to such great lengths just to hide a stone coffin filled with dead bodies at the end of the tunnel. This was likely just meant to deceive and blind others, so Lulia carefully searched the tunnel walls for anything unusual. Sure enough, he found something. He discovered a triangular-shaped stone that seemed suspicious, and so Lulia and his assistant moved the ancient slab, and what they saw left everyone stunned. Behind the triangular stone was a spacious tomb with a domed roof. Right at the center of the tomb was a massive stone sarcophagus. The sarcophagus was carved from a single block of limestone, and its lid alone weighed 5 tons. The bas-relief carvings on the lid left the archaeological team speechless. They were incredibly complex and exquisite, rivaling modern artistry. The archaeological team used modern machinery to open the sarcophagus lid. Inside, they found a skeleton wearing a jade mask. Surrounding the skeleton were numerous burial treasures, including jade and precious jewels. Later, the identity of the skeleton was deciphered. It was Pakal II, the king of Palenque. The entire pyramid turned out to be his burial chamber. Luilia's discovery in the 1950s could truly be described as earth-shattering, because at that time, the majority of historians believed that before the Spanish arrived at the Yucatan Peninsula, the native civilization in Mexico was insignificant, merely primitive tribes like these, bearing no relation to what could be called a true civilization. However, the discovery of the massive pyramid tombs at Palenque stunned the entire world. Everyone was amazed and exclaimed that, in fact, before Europeans discovered the Americas, the Native American civilizations had already developed to an impressively high level. Afterward, Lulia also excavated and uncovered a palace-like structure near the pyramid, known as the Palace of Palenque. The palace was built on a platform 100 meters long and 80 meters wide. On this platform stood a 15-meter-high stone tower used for astronomical observation. In addition, there were numerous courtyards, galleries, and residential chambers. Inside the rooms, the walls were decorated with splendid bas-reliefs. Lulia believed that this magnificent palace must have been one of the most sacred places for the Maya, with the observatory used for rituals and studying celestial phenomena. Lulia believed that around the observatory there must be a vast residential area belonging to the ancient people of Palenque. But unfortunately, he never had the chance to witness it, because by 1979, Lulia had passed away. Later, historians, based on his discoveries, combined with remnants found in other areas, managed to decipher part of the hieroglyphs and thus reconstructed a portion of Palenque's history. According to the hieroglyphic inscriptions inside the tomb of the king of Palenque, Palenque was a city-state on the Yucatan Peninsula, similar to the city-states of ancient Greece. The first king of Palenque, according to the Gregorian calendar, ascended the throne in 2325 BCE, over 4,300 years ago. The inscriptions recorded that he lived for 795 years. Although this number is much lower compared to Sumerian kings, who were said to have lifespans exceeding 20,000 years, it still stands out as one of the legendary cases mentioned in history. The owner of the pyramid tomb was the 18th king of Palenque. During his reign, Palenque reached an unprecedented level of prosperity, engaging in extensive trade with neighboring city-states, while also experiencing military conflicts and attacks among these city-states. So how large was the entire city? Today, the Palenque Historical Park, as designated by the government, covers an area of about 20 square kilometers. This boundary was not drawn arbitrarily, but represents the widest extent of the ancient ruins, based on over a decade of archaeological surveys. Palenque was a city whose urban planning rivaled that of modern cities, with fortified walls surrounding it, agricultural lands, and irrigation systems outside the city. Within the city, there were large residential areas, streets, temple complexes, palaces where princes and nobles resided. There were also numerous large and small plazas for public gatherings. Additionally, canals ran through the city, providing water for daily life. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. According to archaeological estimates, the population of Palenque was around 100,000 people. Although this number was slightly smaller than Athens' 150,000 people during the 5th century BCE, a significant portion of Athens' population actually lived outside the city walls and was not considered urban residents. Today, most of the city of Palenque remains buried beneath the earth and jungle. The part that has been excavated accounts for only about 1/10 of the historical park area. Palenque remained vibrant and active until the 8th century, when it suddenly disappeared. The reason for Palenque's disappearance will be discussed later. Modern archaeology has revealed that city-states like Palenque existed all across the Americas, not just in Mexico, but also in what is now the United States. Furthermore, some of them may have been even larger in scale. In 1849, a U.S. Army lieutenant named James Hervey Simpson led a military expedition to Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon is located in northwestern New Mexico. It is a desert region filled with golden sand and sparse vegetation, where only during the rainy season does a bit of green appear on the ground. Simpson was a topographical engineer for the U.S. Army. In 1848, after the Mexican-American War, New Mexico was officially annexed into the United States. Simpson's task was to survey and map the terrain of this newly acquired territory. Lieutenant Simpson was very curious about New Mexico, the newly joined land. New Mexico was short of food and water, and its population was mainly concentrated in the central northern regions where water sources existed. The Northwest, by contrast, was mountainous desert with no reliable water source. That day, Simpson arrived at Chaco Canyon. Looking through his telescope from a distance, he was astonished to spot signs of a large settlement at the center of the canyon. Locals had told Simpson that the canyon was uninhabited. With no water, no farming, and that no one had lived there for hundreds of years. How could there be a settlement here? When Simpson and his survey team finally struggled to reach the site, they found that what looked like a newly discovered settlement was actually a long-abandoned architectural complex. After a detailed survey, Simpson discovered around 15 large building complexes. Each complex was enormous, and among them, the largest contained about 650 rooms. Its highest point was equivalent to a 4-story building. This structure covered an area of about 10,000 square meters and was 4 stories high. For modern people, this might not seem impressive, but for Lieutenant Simpson in 1849, about 170 years ago, it was a staggering, unbelievable shock. At that time, even across the entire United States, there were hardly any buildings of such scale. Even the White House only had about 5,000 square meters of floor space and around 500 rooms. And without counting the basement, it was only 2 stories tall. It wasn't until after the American Civil War, from 1861 to 1865, that 4-story buildings became more common in major cities like New York and Chicago. As for the first skyscraper in the United States, and the first in the world, it was the Home Insurance Building, completed in 1885. And how tall was this skyscraper? Only 10 stories and 42 meters high. Yet at that time, it was considered a standard engineering marvel. For people living before the 1850s, seeing a 4-story building standing in the wilds of the Americas, and an ancient ruin at that, would have been just as shocking as it would be for modern people today to see a flying saucer appear right before their eyes. What amazed Simpson even more was that the building complex was constructed in multiple layers from the outside in. The outer wall was a brick wall 91 centimeters thick, aligned precisely northeast. Inside the wall, the buildings were diverse. There was a structure resembling a Roman Colosseum, small residential houses, and even a plaza. Later, 21st century architects used computers to digitally reconstruct the original layout based on the site's foundations. Its appearance was clearly that of a modern high-end residential complex, what North Americans would call a condo. One can only imagine the level of shock Lieutenant Simpson felt at that moment. He immediately reported his discovery to the government and named the canyon Chaco. And so, waves of archaeologists came to study and survey the area. They concluded that these ruins were residential complexes built by a native group known as the Pueblo people. They imagined the scene at that time like this. Around 2500 BCE, Chaco Canyon was still a lush forest. The Pueblo Native Americans had already settled there, establishing vast residential areas and farmlands. However, by the 12th century, due to climate change, Chaco Canyon experienced a severe drought lasting for 50 consecutive years. With no other choice, the Pueblo people left their homeland, carrying their advanced construction techniques with them, and migrated to other regions. They found new water sources elsewhere and continued building new complex structures. Not only did Native Americans in what is now the western United States settle and develop sophisticated civilizations, but Native Americans in other regions also thrived and advanced in parallel. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the next exciting adventures. Barnhart, the archaeologist we mentioned at the beginning of today's video, stated that in recent years, archaeologists have discovered large standalone houses and pyramid-shaped apartment complexes built thousands of years ago by Native Americans in the Midwest, East, and South of the United States. Inside, the rooms were spacious and bright. These houses and independent apartments were connected, forming residential communities and cities. Around these communities were commercial centers. Within the cities were streets and large plazas for gatherings. Outside the cities were fertile fields and irrigation systems. Barnhart referred to these Native American cultures as the Mississippian culture. He stated that the complexity of the Mississippian culture far exceeds our imagination. These native chiefdoms organized themselves into a vast trade network stretching from the Rocky Mountains to the Great Lakes region, down to the Gulf of Mexico, and across to the Atlantic coast in the east. They traded a wide range of goods, including copper crafts, tools, furs, animal bone products, food, weapons, and even pet animals. Put simply, long before Columbus arrived in the Americas, the indigenous peoples had already been living prosperous lives, residing in spacious homes, enjoying abundant crops, storing plenty of food, and living without worry. However, later on, due to climate change, certain regions became unsuitable for farming and were abandoned, such as Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. But what's even more frightening is this. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought with them infectious diseases like measles and smallpox. These viruses then traveled along the indigenous trade networks, spreading from city to city, from kingdom to kingdom, leading to mass deaths among the native population. The social structure of these city-states collapsed along with them. So the harsh truth is likely this. 2 to 3 centuries before Europeans deeply penetrated the interior of the Americas and witnessed the civilizations of native peoples, those city-states had already been abandoned. What Europeans saw was a deeply degenerated native civilization. In less than 2 centuries, the indigenous population had declined by about 95%. The few survivors of the pandemics had no choice but to flee. They lost their infrastructure, advanced tools, and social organization, and were forced to return to a nomadic lifestyle, fishing, hunting, and gathering. By the time large numbers of Europeans entered the interior of the Americas, they saw this lifestyle and assumed it had always been this way. They believed Native Americans had always been primitive tribes. And so, they wrote all of these mistaken observations into textbooks. After hearing Barnhart's lecture, many netizens were awakened to a new understanding. But what intrigued people even more was this. Where did these native people, like especially the Maya, come from? How could they have developed such an advanced civilization? A researcher named Eric von Däniken firmly believed that the civilizations of North American natives were brought by beings from another planet. The evidence Däniken presented includes the fact that in many Maya carvings, a recurring theme appears. Numerous figures are depicted wearing something that resembles breathing apparatus and even helmets similar to those of astronauts. The clearest example is the carving on the sarcophagus lid of King Pakal, which we mentioned earlier. The bas-relief shows King Palenque wearing a breathing mask and sitting on what looks very much like a control chair. The entire scene gives the impression that King Palenque is seated in a spaceship, returning to outer space. Although Däniken's conclusion is quite sensational and seems designed to attract attention, the reality is that archaeologists truly cannot explain how the Maya, from such early times, possessed such profound astronomical knowledge. For example, they had an incredibly advanced solar calendar. The Maya culture itself recounts that a feathered serpent god descended from the sky and imparted to the Maya knowledge in fields such as astronomy and architecture. In short, tracing the true origins of the Native American peoples remains an unsolved mystery. However, today's historians and archaeologists have at least begun to face one important realization. What we once believed we saw may not represent the whole truth. Did you notice a key detail mentioned at the beginning of today's story? It was about the archaeologist Alberto Ruiz Lulia. If back then, Lulia had not insisted that legends might hold real truths, if he had only trusted the prevailing narrow-minded conclusions, would we have ever made the subsequent discoveries that helped reveal parts of ancient history? It makes one wonder, who among us is willing to broaden our minds, to view things from a different perspective, confident that the myths, legends, and supposedly baseless superstitions we once dismissed might actually hold valuable insights for our lives, learning, and work? And what about you? What are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comment section below this video. Our sharing for today will pause here for now. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you all so much. See you next time.